And here we are with part two of Unit 6, Week 3. We're going to look at LBJ, who follows up the Kennedy assassination and Kennedy presidency. This is going to be a really short one because we're just going to look at a couple quick things. We've already talked about Johnson quite a bit when we talked about the Vietnam War, because he will be the one that really Americanizes the Vietnam War and it will be his downfall. We also talked about him with the civil rights section because he got the Civil Rights Act passed in 64. He will pass the Voting Rights Act in 65 and a second Civil Rights Act in 68, right before the end of his presidency, that will bring housing equality to minority communities. So let's look at LBJ a little bit. Now, remember, when LBJ was asked by JFK to be his vice presidential candidate, right, his running mate, it was kind of a step down for Johnson. He was the Senate majority leader, which has a huge amount of power. He had been in the Senate for over 20 years. He was very powerful, lots of friends, got a lot of stuff accomplished. And remember, when you're vice president, you don't really have a lot of power. So when he says yes, it is a definite step down for him. And those in the South, he's from Texas, really, really bring that up to him that he has taken a step backwards. And remember that Kennedy surrounded himself with his brother, with his best friends, with guys just like him from Boston, young, eager liberals, and none of them liked Johnson. So when Kennedy is assassinated, there's a really hard transition in the White House itself, but Johnson steps right in, and it's kind of crazy because he really, when he steps in, he says there's only a couple months left in Kennedy's term as president, but he says, I will fulfill Kennedy's legacy. And a big piece of that is the Civil Rights Act that Kennedy never could have gotten passed on his own, but Johnson will be able to get that passed. Another piece on that is that Johnson, being from the South, was quite a racist. And a lot of the Southern Democrats and the Southern government officials really thought having a Southerner in the White House was going to help them kind of get rid of all these civil rights things. But Johnson really doesn't see it that way. He really sees himself fulfilling Kennedy's legacy and moving on to his own great society. So let us look. There we go. JFK's assassination had important consequences, right? We know that Johnson will be able to get the Civil Rights Act passed in 64. A lot of that on kind of how can you not pass this? This was Kennedy's legacy. Kennedy also had planned to pursue a war on poverty, which Johnson will work to carry out. And he will begin his great society. So this is going to be civil rights, which we've already talked about, so we're not going to talk too much about that. Medical, we'll see that, environmental, and social programs. Now, one of the ways that Johnson was able to get things passed was something known as the Johnson treatment. Johnson was a tall man, a big man. He would often wear a cowboy hat. He had this really crazy laugh. He swore all the time. And he would get in your face if you were not listening to him, and he would be in your face until you listened to him. So there are some pictures of him using the Johnson treatment to get things passed. So in 63, right, he finished up the last year of JFK's presidency, but then he runs on his own right for the 64 election. Now, he runs saying, I will keep our boys out of the Vietnam War, so that gets him points. He also runs on JFK's legacy. And he, one of the things that probably really helped him get elected was he runs against Barry Goldwater, who was a very conservative Republican from Arizona. You can see there, that's one of the only states that Goldwater will win is Arizona. Now, Barry Goldwater, he gets this really bad reputation for being an extremist. He says a lot of off-the-cuff things, which is why people in Arizona really like him, because it kind of fits with the Arizona, we're out west, right, in the desert. But on the big stage, it doesn't play over as well. He makes some comments about, why can't we just cut off the eastern seaboard and let it float out to sea, about dropping bombs and dealing with the Soviet Union. So just some really strong views. He also is viewed as a racist. He wasn't a racist, but he was a firm believer in states' rights. And so he promoted, we shouldn't have a Civil Rights Act because each state should be able to come up with their own ideas. And that really made him look bad with the civil rights movement. So LBJ wins and he begins to push for his great society. You can see right there that Johnson really dominated Goldwater. Goldwater really didn't stand a chance. Okay, so let's look at some different things that he did. So one, he passed the Economic Opportunity Act. That will promote job growth. It'll create VISTA. It'll create Job Corps. Just pumps a lot of money into the economic system and getting people jobs. He will also start Project Head Start, or just known as Head Start, which is still around today, which is going to provide free preschool for anyone that wants it. In education, he will pump $1 billion into schools in different ways with the Education Act. That is everything from buying textbooks to paying teachers to upgrading school buildings and technology. He will also start, and not him personally, right, but these are things that he gets past, PBS, right, which is where Sesame Street will be on. Still around today. PBS is still a big thing today. In healthcare, and this is crazy big, he will start Medicare and Medicaid, still around today, right? Medicare is to help provide or supplement, right, healthcare for the elderly, and Medicaid is to help those that can't afford healthcare. And lastly, we're going to look at the Warren Court. Now, we talked about the Warren Court with the civil rights movement, so we're not going to look at any of those again. We are just going to look at what they did for suspects' rights and for the rights of the accused. And there are three major trials that are big and still have impact today. There, good, you can see them. First is going to be Mapp versus Ohio in 1961, and that is the Supreme Court is going to say that any evidence that is illegally seized or seized without a warrant cannot be used in court, which is huge today, right? So imagine that someone, and this is actually what happens, so break into a house, or not break in, but police go into a house without a search warrant and find incriminating evidence. They are no longer allowed to use that evidence in court, which they could have before, right? Or they search your car without just cause. They cannot use anything found in your car, right? Okay, so that's one. Escobedo versus Illinois is you have a man that is questioned by police. No one else is present. It's not recorded. He admits to something. It is proved later he didn't do it. So having an attorney present, right? Or you have the right to it. You can waive that right, but you have the right to it. And lastly, probably the most famous is Miranda versus Arizona. And this will say or determine that when you are accused of a crime or before being questioned, you have to have your rights read to you. If you've ever seen 21 Jump Street, Channing Tatum cannot remember the Miranda rights, and so that allows criminals to get off the hook because he does not read them to them. And short and sweet, that is it with LBJ and the Warren Court.